It was October 16, 2014, a calm afternoon at the Lakewood apartment complex, until the calm was ripped apart by a sudden, chilling crack that echoed through the walls. Then, silence again. For a split second, everything returned to normal. But it wasn't over. A desperate banging followed. Someone was at the door, panicked, shouting, pleading for help. When the neighbors opened up, they found Skylar Nemetz, Danielle Nemetz's husband, standing there wide-eyed, breathless, on the edge of collapse. All he could manage to say before breaking down completely was, "It's Danielle. She's dead." Welcome to True Crimes by Dominic, where real crimes are told with raw honesty and a human voice. If this is your kind of story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps the channel grow and ensures you never miss a new case. We drop new stories weekly, always straight to the point, always grounded in truth. Now, back to Danielle. Danielle Ripien was born January 11, 1995, in San Francisco, California. She had a sister, Ashley, and came into this world 7 weeks early, just 3 pounds, fragile, and fighting for life. The odds were against her from day one. Even the doctors weren't sure she'd make it. But she did. For a while, Danielle lived a normal life until everything changed. At just 2 years old, her mother, Elizabeth, died of cancer. Danielle was too young to understand the weight of it, but that single moment marked the beginning of a tragic pattern in her life. Thankfully, her grandmother, Scarlett Ripien, stepped in and raised her until she was 14. But life once again pulled the rug from beneath her. Scarlett passed away due to old age, leaving Danielle devastated. This time she understood death, and it hit her like a freight train. She later moved in with her stepfather, Michael, who adopted her and became her anchor. But heartbreak wasn't done with Danielle. Michael also passed away. One loss after another, it was as if life never gave her room to breathe. With every blow, Danielle grew more desperate for stability, longing for a family of her own, a place to feel safe, and someone who would stay. Even though fate was very cruel to Danielle, she didn't let go of her fighting spirit. Danielle's friends defined her as a breath of fresh air. Some of her friends even claimed that the phrase, "small but mighty," was made for Danielle. Despite all of these horrible setbacks, Danielle just kept pushing forward, and she invested a lot of her energy into her favorite hobby, cheerleading. But deep down, more than anything, Danielle craved stability. Even though she had a huge extended family and siblings, Danielle just wanted to belong. According to her cheer coach, Danielle would always think of the family of her boyfriend as her own because it was the only stable thing in her life. Danielle was in her senior year of high school when she met a very significant person who would become her forever. His name was Skylar Nemetz. 19-year-old Skylar, fresh out of high school himself, was enlisted in the Army, and he was about to leave for basic training in Georgia. Skylar and Danielle met on October 4th, 2012, at a high school football game in Northern California. They added each other on Facebook, and after messaging back and forth for some time, the pair instantly became inseparable. For both Danielle and Skylar, it was love at first sight, and they both knew that they had found the person they wanted to spend the rest of their lives with. Skylar's and Danielle's relationship moved impossibly fast. Within weeks, Danielle moved in with Skylar and his mom, Danette. On their first Christmas together, Skylar took Danielle to a mountaintop and popped the question. An excited and emotional Danielle said yes, and their future was set. A couple of months later, on March 7th, 2012, Skylar and Danielle got married after Skylar completed his basic training. This was Danielle's dream. She finally had her own family, albeit a small one, but it fulfilled the sense of belonging and being loved, so it was perfect. Married life was blissful for Danielle and Skylar. Skylar taught Danielle how to drive, and the couple were living in Lakewood, Washington, since Skylar was stationed at Fort Lewis. After marriage, Danielle finished high school and started working at a local countertop store. Danielle had dreams of opening up a nail salon, and she also loved doing makeup, so it was only fitting that she started a YouTube channel where she posted makeup videos. The couple also adopted 2 adorable dogs, and like any other couple, they had dreams of traveling the world before settling down and expanding their family. At the time of the case, Danielle's sister Ashley was due to give birth, and Danielle was so excited to become an aunt. But tragically, Danielle wouldn't get to meet her niece or nephew. She wouldn't get the chance to start her own family either. Because on the fateful day of October 16, 2014, a little over 2 years into her marriage with Skylar, Danielle was found lifeless in her home. The crime. It was September 2014 when Skylar was due to leave for a 3-week-long field training operation in Yakima, Washington, leaving Danielle at home with her 2 dogs. Fast forward to October 16th, Danielle spent the day FaceTiming her best friend, Michaela Yingling. On the call, Danielle seemed very excited for Skylar to finally come home, and she even decorated the house with candles. She ran her errands like bathing the dogs and preparing the house for Skylar's return. While prepping, she got a text from Skylar asking her to buy a specific bottle of rum and whiskey for the night, which she did. See, during this field training operation, Skylar was prohibited from drinking while on the base. So this was why Skylar asked Danielle to buy alcohol for him since he was coming home. At around 4 p.m., Danielle reunited with Skylar and FaceTimed Michaela again, and even Skylar joined the call and waved hello at his wife's best friend. Everything seemed perfect at that time, but that was tragically the last time anyone would see Danielle alive, because less than 15 minutes later, a frantic 911 call was made by Danielle and Skylar's neighbors. According to the neighbors, a frantic Skylar came wailing on their door, begging them to call 911. And on the call, the neighbors told the operators that they heard a lot of banging and noises coming from the Nemetz home. And now Skylar was telling them that his wife had accidentally hurt herself while cleaning a rifle. Now for context, Skylar and Danielle were both crazy about firearms, often spending time at the firing range hanging out and testing out a variety of weapons. It was a common date night activity for the two of them. Since Skylar was always out for training and the couple barely had time to themselves, this was their version of spending time together, and they both loved it. Anyway, when Skylar joined the Army, his firearm collection grew to 15, and on Danielle's 19th birthday, Skylar gifted her an automatic rifle in Danielle's favorite color, blue, which was tragically the same rifle Danielle was cleaning when it accidentally went off. The police and emergency services arrived, and when they made their way into the room where Skylar said Danielle were, they were left stunned and speechless. Danielle was slumped over on a table, completely motionless. Her computer was in front of her, and a single shot had unfortunately taken her life. The detectives were baffled, to say the least. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. And the first person they talked to was the now widowed Skylar, who was obviously the only potential witness to this heart-wrenching attack. What happened to Danielle? When the investigators arrived, Skylar was found near his car, and he looked distressed. He was slumped over and appeared to be sobbing. But what the detectives noticed was that Skylar was not actually crying. He was just making sobbing sounds. And even though his eyes were tightly shut and his face contorted, there were no tears. The detectives began questioning Skylar because they genuinely needed to know what had happened in the Nemetz home when Danielle lost her life. But this was where Skylar proceeded to give a completely different story from what he relayed to the neighbors on the 911 call. He said that Danielle was working on her computer and Skylar was the one cleaning the firearm. The magazine was detached, but he didn't know that there was a lone bullet still in the weapon. As he was working on the weapon, which was directly pointed at Danielle, his finger accidentally pulled the trigger and a shot was fired, which struck Danielle instantly and tragically killing her. Now this raised even more suspicions in the police's mind, and they decided to load Skylar into the cop car and drive him down to the station. Inside the car, which was loaded with recording devices, Skylar was emotional. He repeatedly professed his love for Danielle and asked God for forgiveness. He would switch things up, lamenting the potential end of his career to shouting Danielle's name and saying things like he didn't mean to do it. What was so bizarre about Skylar's behavior was that he would be crying with no tears one instant and be dead serious and alert the other, especially when the investigators had questions to ask him. This convinced the detectives that Skylar was putting on a show and he was not actually distraught and emotional. At the station, Skylar's stories continued to change. Every single time he was questioned, something from the previous statement would change, whether it be the firearm's position, who was holding the firearm, how the shot was fired, or where the magazine was when he was cleaning the gun, Skylar was spilling things out differently every single time. Skylar was questioned for 5 hours, and even the police's brains were getting fried by how many times this man changed his story. 8 times to be exact. It was clear to the police that Skylar was not telling the truth, and he was just spinning tales of accidentally shooting his wife, or his wife accidentally shooting herself. Finally, at Skylar's 9th attempt at revising the events of the fateful attack, he said that he was the one who pulled the trigger and even aimed it at Danielle, but he didn't know that the firearm was loaded. First of all, even if the firearm wasn't loaded, why would anyone point it at their loved ones? Second, the wound on Danielle's head showed that the firearm was at close range at the back of the head, so it got everyone thinking something really dreadful and dark. Did Danielle even know that Skylar was pointing a weapon so close to her? It is just so terrifying to even think about it. Regardless of whether it was intentional or not, Danielle may have been completely obvious to what was taking place right behind her. Now, while Skylar was at the station, a couple of police officers reached out to Danielle's family and friends to not only break the news of her untimely passing, but also probe for information on the inner details of Skylar and Danielle's relationship. In the police's minds, they thought that the couple's marriage wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Well, they were absolutely right, because a lot of Danielle's friends came forward with information. And let's just say Skylar was not on their nice list. The first person who came forward was Danielle's best friend, Michaela. She said that she always got a weird vibe from Skylar. As soon as they met, Skylar whisked Danielle off her feet. Now, this alone isn't anything to worry about, but Michaela felt that Skylar should have spent more time getting to know Michaela, since she and Danielle were so close. Now, you may or may not agree with this, but that's how she felt. Michaela also said that Skylar would keep a close watch on Danielle, wouldn't allow her to go and meet her friends, and even prohibited her from spending money without his consent. But if I'm being honest, the money thing could have just been because they were financially strapped. So that's a bit of a reach if you ask me. Another man named James Peltier, who was a pseudo-father figure for Danielle, had only met Skylar once, if you can even call Skylar shaking James's hand and going back to his car meeting. Now, this was certainly a bit odd. Skylar didn't make any effort to get to know the closest thing Danielle had to a dad, and this just didn't sit right with anyone. And this next bit of information is a bit more difficult for Skylar to talk his way out of. See, James also told the detectives that one time Skylar lashed out at Danielle during a fight and smashed her phone. Danielle also confided in James about Skylar being extremely violent and physical, especially when he got drunk, and this truly haunted James to the core. Skylar would also isolate Danielle and pressure her to keep the house tidy at all times, and friends noticed that Danielle just didn't have that spark or light in her eyes anymore after the two had been married for a while. She was stiff, her smiles were forced, and she had to ask Skylar for anything and everything. To add fuel to the fire, Skylar suspected Danielle of infidelity. Skylar was suspicious of Danielle cheating on him with her boss, Michael Newton, even though there wasn't any evidence, not one single piece to back this up. Then a woman named Carrie Fass came to the police station during the investigation and told the detectives all about Skylar and Danielle's anything but perfect marriage. Carrie was the wife of one of Skylar's co-workers at the countertop store, and she got to key and woo Danielle pretty well. Turns out that on top of being manipulative and controlling, Skylar was also physically abusive towards Danielle. Carrie told the investigators that Danielle had to wear long-sleeve shirts to cover the bruises on her arms, all of which were inflicted by Skylar. Carrie even told the detectives about Danielle's boss, Michael, the one that Skylar was so worried about. Carrie said that Danielle's married boss, Michael, was an attractive guy, but that was about it. Danielle never crossed a line at her job, and the relationship between Michael and Danielle was strictly professional. But did Skylar think the same way? Of course not. He was convinced that Danielle was cheating on him. He even accused Danielle of having an affair with an old high school friend of hers by the name of Jeremy. Now, Jeremy and Danielle did meet up when Skylar was away for that training in Yakima, but it was simply to catch up as friends. But Skylar, being the insecure person he was, suspected Danielle of being unfaithful if she even breathed in the direction of another man. I can only imagine how exhausting it must have been for Danielle to keep up with Skylar's unreasonable behavior. But now that everything about Skylar and Danielle's dwindling relationship is out in the open, let's go back to the investigation, because the police had just gotten the ballistic analysis report, and things were very bizarre. First of all, the trajectory of the bullet didn't match how Skylar described the incident. The bullet would have hit Danielle in a completely different place if the firearm was resting on Skylar's waist, as he said in a statement previously. But the trajectory of the bullet showed that the firearm had to have been resting at shoulder height for the bullet to strike Danielle in the back of the head. So this proved that Skylar was lying, and add to that the chilling detail of aiming the firearm so close to Danielle when her back was turned just makes everything so much worse. Skylar also had a pretty serious injury on the index finger of his dominant hand. It was the same hand he would use to do everything, even handle firearms. He couldn't have gotten this injury simply by cleaning a rifle, but he could have gotten it by firing one. So with all of the evidence and even some heated text conversations between Danielle and Skylar, which only painted the real picture of their unstable relationship, the investigators charged Danielle Nemetz with the first-degree murder of his wife Danielle and arrested him. He was held in Pierce County Jail under a $1 million bond. Skylar pleaded not guilty to the charges, and he was awaiting trial. The sentencing. The trial began on January 21st, 2016, about 2 years after Danielle lost her life. The thing that's so crazy to me is that throughout the entire process, despite all of the evidence against him, Skylar's mother stood by his side. And this was so heartbreaking to see. I'm sure any mother would, regardless of the circumstances, but his mom, Danette, truly believed and hoped her son was innocent. She even went as far as selling her house, car, and expensive jewelry to pay Skylar's bail, and got Michael Stewart, one of Washington's most successful defense attorneys, to represent her son. The prosecution presented evidence that included statements from Danielle's friends and family, the ballistic analysis, and Skylar's very odd behavior following Danielle's demise. The prosecution argued that a seasoned soldier who knew firearms like the back of his hand couldn't make the mistake of accidentally firing a round that struck Danielle. For some background, Skylar first handled a firearm when he was only 4 years old, which is crazy in its own right, but that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, he first used an automatic rifle, the style of weapon that claimed Danielle's life, when he was only 14, so he knew how to handle firearms, disengage them, and make them safe for cleaning or even routine checking. He'd been doing it for years. The prosecution tried to convince the jury that Skylar lost control of his anger after yet another fight with Danielle about cheating on him and fired a single round when her back was turned. They also alleged that Skylar was very detached after the fact, and instead of mourning the loss of his wife, the love of his life, he chose to dump all of the alcohol that he asked Danielle to buy for him down the sink. During the trial, Skylar continued to try to fake his emotions, but in all honesty, he was terrible at it. He would pretend to cry, but would never tear up. His voice was never shaky, and he'd never show anything that resembled a genuine emotion. This man was neither grief-stricken nor remorseful for what was going on. The defense, on the other hand, was trying to get rid of the first-degree murder charge. Michael Stewart said that Skylar didn't intentionally end his wife's life. It was just a tragic accident, and Skylar was guilty of manslaughter at best. The trial went on for a month, and at the end, the jury had a verdict. On March 3rd, 2016, Skylar was found not guilty of first-degree murder, but was guilty of first-degree manslaughter. The prosecution couldn't convince the jury that Skylar had intentionally ended his wife's life. This was a devastating moment in the courtroom, but the worst was yet to come for Danielle's loved ones. On March 25th, 2016, Skylar Nemetz was given the highest possible sentence for the charge, and that was 13 and a half years in prison. He is scheduled to be released in 2029. But at the end of July 2020, Skylar's case resurfaced. He claimed that he was given the highest sentence for the manslaughter charge, but his young age wasn't even considered. Skylar's attorney stated that his sentence was a complete miscarriage of justice. It was alleged that the jury didn't consider his youth and immaturity when giving him the highest possible sentence. But accident or no accident, Need I remind you that this awful human being is in prison, serving a measly 13 and a half years for shooting his wife? Skyler's defense team argued that even though he behaved recklessly, the jury failed to understand that recklessness is the very hallmark of the youth. So is the defense implying that a young person can commit cold-blooded murder, end someone's life, and not face consequences just because young people are typically immature and reckless? Thankfully, the jury pushed this appeal to the side and sternly stated that being young and reckless doesn't give anyone a free pass to commit heinous crimes. So, Skyler will have to spend his life behind bars until 2029, the aftermath. Skyler's sentence was a punch to Danielle's family's gut. 13 and a half years was nowhere near enough to give justice to Danielle, who lost her life so callously and at the hands of her own husband, who was not only manipulative, but also abusive. James was not Danielle's biological daughter, but he loved her just the same. One of James's fondest memories with Danielle is when she used to dash through the front door and embrace him in a bear hug. James is crushed that he will never get to see Danielle's smiling face or hear her voice again. Danielle's sister, Ashley, always imagined they'd grow old side by side, raising their families, sharing holidays, laughing at the chaos of life. But those dreams ended abruptly. Danielle's life was cut short at just 19, not by fate or illness, but by someone she trusted to protect her. Someone who promised forever and delivered death instead. On October 26, 2014, friends and family gathered under candlelight to remember Danielle. They spoke of her laughter, her strength, her warmth, how she defied the odds as a premature baby, only to have her life stolen in the most senseless way. What makes this story harder to accept is the so-called justice system. A man who showed signs of control, jealousy, and manipulation was given what many believed to be a laughable sentence. Danielle was a survivor from the start, but in the end, she couldn't survive the person who claimed to love her most. There's no poetic ending here, no comforting lesson, just heartbreak and a lingering question. How many more Danielles will there be before we start to see real justice? Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you believe the punishment fit the crime? Or was Danielle failed by the very system meant to protect her? Your voice matters, and it helps this channel grow so we can continue bringing you more real, raw stories like this one every 2 days. If this case moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. It doesn't cost a thing, but it helps True Crimes by Dominic reach more people and keeps stories like Danielle's from being forgotten. So, was it justice or a joke? Drop your thoughts below. Thanks for watching True Crimes by Dominic. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and stay human. No.